Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today here on the Expert Mind Talks by Mind Journal. I'm Dr. Karen Finn. I am a divorce coach and I help people navigate divorce from the moment it enters their mind as a possible solution to their marital problems, which, by the way, it isn't always, all the way through the process of divorce, out through the other side to rebuilding your life after divorce and even co parenting. So I work with people in all different kinds of situations. Our topic today is really a big one that we get to unpack. It's about when should you get a divorce? How will you know? It's a very confusing topic for a lot of folks because when you get married, you pledge your love to someone else and they pledge their love to you no matter what, right? So you've made a commitment. If you've gotten married in a church or a synagogue or a temple, then there's even more of a commitment for a lot of folks who do that, because then they've promised not only each other, but their larger community and the higher supreme being. So it is complicating deciding when you should get a divorce. Now, there are actually some cases where I think you kind of have to get divorced. It's not a question of whether or not you should. If you are in an abusive situation and your safety or your children's safety is at stake, then yes, please get yourself to a shelter, get yourself someplace safe, and get yourself out of that situation. It's not okay for you or your children or even your pets to be in that kind of danger. The next case that I think really more often than not is an indication that you need to get divorced is if your spouse, despite repeated requests, refuses to get help for an addiction. That is a very, very difficult situation to be in. And for anyone who has suffered with an addiction or known someone who suffered with an addiction, you probably already know that the only way for that person to move forward with their life and not continue to spiral in just the hopelessness of their situation is that they make the decision. So that's why it's important that you ask them to move forward and deal with their addiction. But until they decide to, they're not going to. And if you've repeatedly asked and they repeatedly refuse, then it's probably in your best interest to go ahead and end the marriage. Now, there's also the case of if there is criminal activity. That's another good reason. If you don't want to be involved in that, then it's probably a good idea for you to let your spouse live their life and you live your life. So I think those are the really big cases where I just really advocate for people to move on with their lives. Other than that, gosh, deciding whether or not you need to get divorced is really a gray area because it varies for everyone. What matters for some people to have a happy marriage, right, would be something that's not important to another person. So there's no really hard and fast rules that everyone can look at outside of the three that I've already given you to say it's time that we get divorced. Even infidelity. Some people use infidelity as a way to actually improve their marriage, and others see it as the end of their marriage. So there's really a wide spectrum as to what people are willing to work through and what people are willing to change in order to maintain their marriage. So I'd love to hear what your challenge is, what you're thinking about. How have you come to the decision point of wondering if divorce is the right answer for you? Is there one thing that's happened? Is there a series of things that have happened? Have you just grown apart? What is it that's triggering your thoughts of divorce? Now, I do have another question here that someone has asked, and maybe this will help start the conversation in another way. I was asked, what are the signs of divorce? What are the first signs, right? So again, that's really a complicated question. I wish there was a really super duper simple answer. So you could say, okay, here's my checklist. I know that if 1, 3, and 7 have happened out of these 10 things, then yeah, we're probably headed for divorce. But it's not that simple because it really does vary for every couple. And you know what I think it really, really, really comes down to is whether or not you and your spouse have given up hope for things ever getting any better. And neither one of you really are willing to work on making it better. If that's the point you're at, things can't change. The only way things can change is if y'all change and each have responsibility for yourself. And that's where it has to start. And now I'm not preaching this from somebody, who has had the perfect marriage her entire life and all that stuff. The truth is, I got divorced. I was married for 17 years, almost 18 years, and I got married at 19. And it just did not work out for us. And I really agonized over the decision. And I know that my ex-husband did too, because we went through therapy, we went through counseling, all kinds of stuff to try to figure out, can it be saved? And the truth was, it couldn't. We needed to part ways. And over the years, when I look back at that, I can see that I can only talk about myself. I wasn't mature enough to get married when I did. I didn't know who I was. And as I started to realize who I was, it wasn't the person that was in the marriage. So I needed to get divorced. So that's a case where I wasn't willing to continue to not be who I was. And so that's why on my side, it was time for me to get divorced. But as you can tell, it wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't something that I just woke up one day and said, yep, I'm getting divorced. No, it was very, very agonizing and very thoughtful. So another question that I'm often asked, because people will feel lonely in their marriages, is what is emotional neglect in a marriage? What does that really mean? So, emotional neglect of any kind really consists of a lack of emotional awareness and response. So that's kind of, some big words, right? And I don't know about you, but when I'm feeling really emotional or I'm feeling hurt or I'm feeling sad, I don't want big words. I just want somebody who can tell it to me straight so I can know what's going on, right? So if you persistently feel lonely in your marriage, if your spouse isn't capable of offering you support or kindness or compassion and empathy, right, then you're probably suffering from emotional neglect. Now, the challenge with this is that people will often interpret things differently. So someone may consider that they only feel connected to someone, they only feel emotionally connected to someone when there is a lot of conversation, right? That's how they feel emotionally connected to their spouse. And other people may feel emotionally connected when they're doing things for their spouse, or their spouses doing things for them. You may recognize this as the love languages. So emotional neglect can be confusing because you and your spouse may have different love languages. And if you've not heard of love languages before, Gary Chapman wrote a wonderful book, and you can even find online free tests so that you and your spouse can figure out what your love languages are. And what I've seen happen again and again in my practice with my individual clients is that once we figure out what the love languages are, it becomes much more simple to ask for what you need and to offer what your spouse needs to feel emotionally connected. And it may seem weird that you have to ask for having your emotional needs met, but the truth is, the reason why you do is because no two people view the world exactly the same. And yes, I know when I first fell in love with my first husband and with my current husband, right? We were on the same wavelength. You know, you feel like you can complete each other's sentences, and you do, right? You just kind of know what the other person is thinking. And as time goes by, that kind of tight connection seems to wither a little bit. And we all make the assumption that it should still be there, that our spouse should still know exactly what we're thinking and what we need, and that we shouldn't have to say what it is. They should just know. If they really loved us, they'd know and they'd do something about it. Well, unfortunately, that's not the truth, right? It's our responsibility to ask for what we need. We can't expect anybody to read our minds, just like, even though it may seem like it, that we can read somebody else's mind sometimes. The truth is we can't, right? So it is very important that communication happens in a healthy, supportive way so that everybody can have their needs met. And I will tell you that a lot of times when someone comes to me and says, you know, Karen, I'm not sure if I need to get divorced or not, and I ask them, you know, to tell me what's going on, it almost always comes down to communication, and communicating in a way that's respectful and can be heard by the other person. So let's see. I have another question that I was asked before the show. And that question is, oh my gosh, it's a doozy. It's, should I fight for my marriage or let it go? Yeah, it's really a big question. And it's something that requires a lot of soul searching to do. I can, however, give you some guidelines, right? I can't tell you exactly what you need to do, but I can give you some guidelines of things to think about so that you can make your own best decision. So, I am a big believer in personal responsibility, right? We each have responsibility for ourselves and for the relationships that we cultivate, right? And hopefully you're cultivating the relationship with your spouse, or maybe that's why you're wondering if you should get divorced, right? Because you've given up on that, or your spouse has given up on that. The thing to remember is that whatever you choose, you're going to have to look yourself in the eyes every single day after that decision. Yeah, you're going to have to live with yourself. So for most folks, that means that you want to make sure you've unturned every single stone you can possibly think of to make your marriage work. It doesn't mean that you keep doing the same thing again and again, expecting your spouse to change. It's about you changing. It's about you deciding, are you in it or not? And if you're in it, knowing you're going to have to live with yourself, you make every effort to make sure you've done what you can to make it work. And if there's nothing else you can do, then, and nothing is changing, nothing is improving, then I think you know your answer. And no, it's not easy to get to that point either. Yeah, I mean, frankly, this whole discussion today is for a lot of folks who are facing it, just about everybody who's facing it, come on, it's painful. It's scary, right? There's so much uncertainty about it. And if you do happen to get to the point where divorce is the best answer for you in your situation, then I think this next question that I was asked is so important. And the question is, how do I ask for a divorce peacefully? Right? Nobody wants to get caught up in the drama of divorce. No, but, well, okay, I'll take that back. Some people do, right? But if you're here, if you're part of the Expert Mind Talks and you're listening to this, you're a regular Mind Journal reader, then yeah, that's not what you want. You want to be able to find a peaceful, respectful way to say it's time to get divorced. And that's really what you need to focus on, right? You need to focus on how you can be your most compassionate self, your most honest self, your most respectful self, not only to your spouse, but to yourself, right? So if you know that divorce is the right answer, then you need to kindly and respectfully let your spouse know and be there with compassion with their reaction, right? Because they may react or they may respond, right? I don't know, but you'll know. You know your spouse well enough to anticipate that. You'll want to do it someplace where y'all can be private. I've had some people come to me and tell me these stories of their spouse taking them out for their birthday dinner or anniversary dinner and tell them there in the restaurant that they want a divorce, right? That's just horrible and so disrespectful. So if you can remember, again, that if you're making this decision, you're the one that has to live with yourself after doing it. So you want to be as respectful and in your highest self as you can possibly be for yourself and for your spouse, especially if you have children, right? Because the truth is, you're still going to have a relationship with your kid's other parent for the rest of your life because your kids love both of you. And you need to be able to let the kids love both of you and ideally work well together to make sure that your kids are raised to be happy, healthy, well-adjusted people. Okay, so let's say that you've determined that divorce is the right answer for you. You've asked your spouse in as peaceful a manner as possible how to get divorced. Okay. And that is a great segue into the next question that I was asked. The next question is, what are the 5 stages of divorce? So what can you expect from an emotional standpoint when you're going through divorce, right? And the timing of this is a little bit different for everyone. So if you're the one making the decision, you may have worked through some of these stages I'm going to talk through before the actual process of divorce has begun. And if you're the one who was told that you're going to get divorced because your spouse made the decision, then you will probably start this process as soon as you hear the news. So the 5 stages of divorce are actually the same as grief if you want to follow the most common understanding of it. I think there are another couple stages in just the 5, but I'll talk through the 5 first, and then I'll add in the 2 that I think also come along. So the first of the 5 stages of divorce is denial, right? So it's kind of the question of, should I get divorced or shouldn't I, right? Or maybe even before that with, no, everything's fine. We'll work it out. Everything's okay. And if you're getting to the stage of denial by your spouse saying that they want a divorce, then you'll deny that that's what they really mean, right? And you'll quickly start coming up with, well, if I do this, that, or the other thing, then I know they'll change their mind, right? So there's no other conversation. It's just a matter of, it can't be real. That can't be happening. We've been together for so many years, whatever that is, or so many months, whatever it is. The next phase is anger. And it makes sense to be angry when your hopes and dreams for your future are gone, right? They just up and vanish. And that's what divorce does. So anger makes a whole lot of sense. The next stage is bargaining. Bargaining is, kind of, how can we make this better? I don't want to do this. What are the things we can do? How about if I do this? Will that make you want to come back to me? And it's really a difficult stage when it's already been decided to get divorced. And it's a difficult stage if you're the one trying to make the decision to get divorced, because you're bargaining without really the outcome known, so you're trying to make all kinds of deals. Well, if I just do this, that, or the other thing, then maybe my spouse will come around and our marriage will get better. So it's really kind of difficult. Where I see both spouses often catch up with each other, the person who asked for the divorce and the person who's on the receiving end of being told they're getting divorced, is kind of the depression stage. When your life changes so dramatically, as it does when you get divorced, it's pretty easy to fall into depression and just feeling bad. Now, it's not usually a diagnosable, like take all kinds of medication kind of stuff, at least not from the therapists that I've talked to who are used to diagnosing things. What I typically see are people who are in what's known as a situational depression. So it just means that they feel really bad and they have the symptoms of depression, but they aren't clinically diagnosably depressed. And so when you hit this stage, there are lots of little things you can do to help move yourself forward. And if those don't work, that's when you need to talk to your doctors and find out, okay, I think this is more than I can handle, and it's probably a good idea for me to get therapy and or a prescription to help me through this, right? So I can see that there is something beyond what all I've lost and all the changes I'm having to make. And that brings us to the final stage, which is acceptance. Acceptance just means that, okay, I'm divorced. I can accept that fact and I'm moving on with my life. And I'm going to make the best of it because it's still my life. And there's still plenty more for me to do, lots more experiences, lots more growth, maybe even another person for me to fall in love with, right? That's what the acceptance stage is. So I know that's the 5 basic ones. And that's what people usually ask, is what are the 5 basic stages of divorce? But I think there's another couple that don't necessarily fit into these 5 buckets. The first one is intense fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what could happen, fear of what is happening, right? There's a whole lot of fear. Sometimes the fear is masked by the anger stage, and sometimes it's just out there full force, and that's what you feel is incredibly afraid. I kind of went through the big time fear when I got divorced. I was so afraid, and everything that I thought of, as a possibility always wound up with me being broke, having to live on the streets, and dying alone. It wasn't very logical, but that's where my fear took me. And at times I felt paralyzed by it. So I know that after working with so many people, I'm not alone in seeing this stage of fear as part of the divorce process. So that's why I just want to bring it to your attention. If you happen to feel something like that, it's normal and you can get through it, right? Because fear just lets you know there's something that's important to you that you need to pay attention to and get into action to resolve. The other one, the other stage that I think is often kind of overlooked or just grouped into the acceptance stage is forgiveness. Oftentimes, when a couple decides to get divorced, it is kind of a blame fest. Well, if he had done this, if she had done that, if I had, blah, 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 right? So there's lots of blame. There's finger pointing at the spouse, there's finger pointing at yourself. And so there's guilt, blame, shame, more than enough to go around. And it really has to be dealt with, right? There has to be a point where you reach forgiveness of yourself for what you could have done, should have done, didn't do, all of that, and of your spouse, right? You have to forgive them because honestly, the truth is everybody's doing the absolute best that they can in the situation they're in and with what they know and are capable of in that moment, right? And yeah, we can go to extremes and talk about extremes, but I don't think that's really important for our conversation right now. The conversation is getting to forgiveness with respect to this idea of divorce, right? When you can truly be at peace and let go of the resentment, right? You're giving yourself a gift. If you have children, you're giving your children a gift of you being even more healthy, more vibrantly you. And that's where you can actually be the most loving to yourself, be the most present, and when you're in that state, it will show and be reflected in everything that you do. So that was kind of a whirlwind tour of this question of when should you get a divorce? There's obviously a lot that goes into it, and every situation is completely different. But one of the things I know is really vital for wherever you end up with on this question of divorce is self-love. You need to take care of yourself. You need to make sure that you're meeting your needs and that you're as strong and healthy as possible for whichever direction it is that's the right one for you and your marriage. And to help you with that, I'm actually running a free self-love challenge on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me on either platform at drkarenfinn.com. Dr. Karen Finn. Sorry, I started to give you my website. Oh my goodness. It's funny how sometimes we just slip into something, isn't it? So you can find me on Instagram or Facebook at Dr. Karen Finn. And you can take part in my self-love challenge there. And if you'd like to learn more about me or the work that I do, you can also visit my website, which is drkarenfinn.com. It's been really lovely chatting with y'all today. And I hope to hear from some of you with specific questions that you have about divorce. I'll check the chat later. And just take care. I look forward to seeing y'all again soon. Bye-bye.